Well, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 together and just our time in the Word here. But would you join me as we just want to focus our hearts and attention to God's Word, and we'll go from there. Heavenly Father, we're just looking to hear from you this morning. I hope that we're already hearing from you with our worship, our tithes and offerings, our just being together as your bride, hearing testimonies of what you're doing around the country and around the world. Like, that's a part of our just worship together as a family. And so I just pray that we'll continue to hear from you as we now look at your word. And I pray that it encourages us. I pray that it challenges us. It convicts us. And it leaves us better than we were when we walked in. Because that's the power of your word and your Holy Spirit. So we submit all of this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I want to just give you some encouragement as Natalie and I and our family, and we have staff at Maranatha, as we think about, like, what should we, like, how do we keep focused on the mission of showing and telling people about this God that we love? Lord, would you just encourage us in your word how to keep focused on that? I can't help but think it's the same sort of encouragement that you as a church plant need to hear about continuing to be on God's mission for being salt and light to this area of Colorado Springs and your neighbors and coworkers, people you go to school with. This is the kind of encouragement we're going to read out of 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Now, this is Paul. Paul the Apostle is basically giving a recipe, like a little bit of a, like, here's how I reach and here's how I keep focused on the mission of God. And so Paul's going to give us his recipe, his description of how he keeps on reaching those around him for Christ. And there's some really good nuggets for us to consider for our own lives and for our church here, Freedom Church. Starting in verse 19. Even though, Paul says, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation here, even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. Verse 20. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who follow the Jewish law, I too lived under that law, even though I am not subject to the law. I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. Verse 21. When I am with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. Verse 22. When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with the purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching, I myself might be disqualified. Okay, so this is 1 Corinthians 9 and just the second half of chapter 9. Now, this chapter is about Paul saying, hey, I'm going to give up my rights. Like, I'm a believer. I'm a follower of this God. I'm a man. Paul's a Jew. He can relate to the Romans, So all these things that kind of identify who Paul is. He's been recently converted to Christianity. His past, all of these things. Paul is saying, even though I'm a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. So just starting right there, just Paul's thought here of man, I'm not owned by anybody. If I could sum up sort of our American way, that would really be it. We love to be just prideful people, not just America. I'm just saying people. We're just hardwired in our selfishness, in our flesh to I don't belong to anybody. I just slip into that mode No, don't tell me what to do. Like, I don't even want to obey the speed limit. I don't want anybody to tell me. I don't want to be under authority. And Paul is just saying, hey, like, I am no one's slave in terms of from a human, perspective. But Paul is going to then unpack for us, like, that is the absolute opposite direction that we should be thinking as someone who wants to really follow Christ with our lives. Like, that's the opposite direction to be thinking. However, I don't know about you, but day in and day out, week in and week out, I feel sort of this like pride and entitlement, and like I'm no man's servant. When Christ says, no, I want you actually to be a slave to all. I want you to be submissive to a body of believers in your life. I want you to be almost like interdependent on one another. That's like being a part of the church, right? And so Paul is just saying, hey, even though I'm free from all people, I become a slave, though, to all people, that I might bring many to Christ. So Paul starts initially just saying, there's no way Freedom Church is going to grow with an attitude of, I don't belong to anybody. And this is just really about me and kind of what I'm getting out of this experience at this church. And it's great to see that that's not the way this church has started, Freedom Church. It's actually started with Paul's same heartbeat. We want to be a slave to all these people in Colorado Springs, in our neighborhood here that we're meeting, in your homes. We want to be a slave to all these people to bring many to Christ. And that idea of a slave is not a real attractive one. Matter of fact, our family loves to travel, and we've traveled a lot to the east and to the south, and the idea of slavery. And man, in our culture today, it's like that was a wicked thing that even like our culture, our society, our country has really participated in. And we want to be like free from slavery. Like no one, is a slave. But again, there's a counterintuitiveness to God's word, isn't there? Because actually, this idea of like putting yourself humbly underneath of somebody else, submitting to serving others, is actually the way you're going to win more people to Jesus. That's the way Freedom Church is going to grow. That's the way Maranatha Camp is going to continue to impact people for future generations, is if we're willing to be a slave, to put ourselves underneath of somebody else so that we might win others to Christ, to put our way of doing things, our preferences, our opinion, putting those aside. That's going to be the way to win more people to Jesus, okay? So then Paul gets into talking about three different people in his life and context. It might not be the same for us, but just check this out. Three different groups of people that Paul says he's ministering to, and he's writing to this group of believers a couple thousand years ago, but he might as well be writing to us today because we're around some of these same types of people. And I'm not saying that these are the only three people we come into contact with, but I think we can learn from Paul. We probably do have some of these people in our lives, and how might we, like Paul, be out to win more of them to Jesus? So I'm going to unpack these. These are pretty neat. With the Jews, he says, now Paul's a Jew himself. So it's not real hard. He says here, when I was with the Jews in verse 19 or verse 20, he says, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who follow the Jewish law, I too lived under that law, even though I am not subject to that law, right? Paul himself, where is it? Is it in Philippians, Scott, where Paul has like his, kind of like his pedigree or his resume? And he's like if you want to know somebody who was a Jew of the Jews, right? Like I pretty much was the most successful law follower like you could find out there, right? Like my background, my education, like I was a successful law keeper. Like I don't know anybody that I think I know that brags about being a successful, anybody here a successful law keeper? Like my wife loves breaking the law. Well, maybe not all the time, like all the legal laws of our country, but she's a real free spirit over there. And she's kind of rubbing off on our kids in the same way. Any others? Scott's raising his hand. Your pastor's a lawbreaker over here. But Paul is like, hey, I have people in my life, i.e. the Jews. Paul was a Jew himself, didn't have any problem relating to a Jew. He says, I relate to them. I can appreciate some of their law-following spirit, this zealous or following the laws. And there's, how many was there? The Jews had like 800 some laws, a lot of them kind of man-made too, that they took pride in following. Paul said, I can relate to the religious. I want you just to think about for a second. This church is going to reach the kind of people you're friends with, the kind of people in your neighborhood, the kind of people you work with, the kind of people you touch shoulders, rub shoulders with, that your kids play sports with. Just think about, with me for a minute, those people. Does anyone know a religious, zealous, rule follower of God? Raise your hand. Does anybody know anybody like that? If we think about it for a second, like we all kind of know someone like that. And Paul's like, I'm going to even like enter in and appreciate the law, following the law, in order that I might win more to Christ. Not that I might become restricted myself and become slave, like we were singing, like, chains. People can be chained to the laws that they follow, and that's what they worship, if you will. They idolize how good they are before God. Do those people still exist today, or is that just 2,000 years ago? Do you know anyone in your sphere of influence that you'd like to see come to know Christ, you'd like to see come to this church and get free from some of that? Well, you're not just going to help them by saying, hey, you idiots, stop following the law so much. No, Paul didn't approach it that way. Paul said, man, if I need to even help by entering into some of their real lawness without compromising it yourself, Paul's like, I'm going to do that, but so that I can win others to Christ. Now, if it becomes so apparent, they're just resisting it to a degree that it's unhealthy and like it's tearing this church apart, well, then you got to let some people go, right? I'm not encouraging that you just become infected with that sort of unhealthy law following. But isn't it interesting that Paul says, I'm a friend to the religious? And I think we got to think about that as a new church. Don't just think about the irreligious, apathetic, they're kind of into whatever, culture in the Front Range, which there's a lot of that. Don't forget, in your interest to reach people and grow as a new church, don't forget about the religious people. Jesus didn't. He had a love for the religious as well as the irreligious, far from God people. But sometimes church plants, Scott, and I've just seen this for over 20 years or 15 years that I've been helping church plants, is we get so excited about reaching the irreligious people. Almost proud of it. Or we're going to reach people that wouldn't darken the door of a church. But you know what? I've actually seen a lot of churches grow reaching religious people as well, showing them a different kind of religion, if you will. Like James talks about, a different kind of religion. One that's not about me and my rule following, right? So I want you just to think about, and it doesn't mean that every single one of us has to be going out and really reaching the religious people, but that's a sect of people. It's a group of people that as you guys are sharing and doing life together, don't forget about the religious, zealous people. Their hearts are loved by God as much as the irreligious heart. And that's a group of people right around where you're meeting and gathering and doing church that they need Jesus. And Paul said, I don't forget about the religious. Now then he switches gears and says, when I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law so that I can bring them to Christ. But he says, I do not ignore the law, I obey the law of Christ. So this is kind of what I would group as like the irreligious. Now, when you think about Jesus' earthly ministry, he spent time around, and boy, the religious people they were always there lurking about, right? I'm going through the book of Mark right now in my own quiet time, and the religious people, they're just like, they're showing up everywhere. And I'm like, okay, they want to sabotage Jesus. They're sort of like, this is just weird, like all these people following him. Who knows all their motives, but they're always there. And Jesus, no doubt, was, again, I mean, he sometimes really got after him. Right? Like, I didn't come for the healthy. I came for the sick. I mean, he just got after him. But also, I had to think that Jesus, he loved. And some of the religious people like Nicodemus that snuck up in the dark just to talk to Jesus, he didn't shun them. You're one of the religious people. But Jesus also, and this is sometimes what we get almost proud of as a church plant, is that we're reaching those irreligious people, because Jesus' ministry was full of reaching people that were indifferent. Like I'm thinking about Levi, the tax collector. Right after Jesus saw him and said, I believe it was Levi, right? And he said, like, hey, come with me, drop everything you're doing with your tax collecting booth and follow me. And it says he dropped everything and he followed Jesus. And then it says later that day or later that week, he invites all of his notorious sinners, all of his tax collectors, people that the religious people were saying, oh, you're hanging out with those people. You must not be a real follower of God if you're hanging out with those people. And this house is packed full of the irreligious people. And some people are like, see, Jesus was so comfortable around the irreligious people. That's the kind of church plant we want to be. Right? We should. There's a lot of irreligious people. Does anybody know anybody in your life that's an irreligious person? And I just mean someone who could care less about the law of God. They take this Bible and like, whoa, chuck it. But, they have some absolute truth that's important to them, as well. It's just that they're like, I could care less about this God. Just ruins people. Religion. Nah. I mean, we were up in the Boulder area for 8 years. Are you kidding me? It was so difficult to like hold up the Word of God and have respect for it. There's so many, not just irreligious, but they were just adamant about people following like God's way. And they're not, by the way, they're not just up in Boulder. They're in North Platte, Nebraska. They're here in Colorado Springs. They're in California. We just lived there for 4 years. They're everywhere. Okay? But Paul said one of the successes to growing a church, like Freedom Church, is love the irreligious. How many of you are more comfortable? Think about this for a second, a little pop quiz. How many of you are more comfortable with irreligious people than religious people? Just a show of hands. I'm not judging. I'm just curious. Who's more comfortable with kind of irreligious, I could care less about God, that kind of crowd than you are a religious person? Is anyone more comfortable around the irreligious? Okay. Maybe, right? Lindsay, more comfortable around that. And I'm not saying irreligious people that are just like picking fights with you all the time. I'm just saying like, I'm honestly a bit more comfortable with parents that go to our school with our kids that they really don't like talking about God. They get uncomfortable when we talk about God, but they're fun-loving people. They love like, the world they live in. They love their children. Matter of fact, some of them act more like Christians than our religious Christian friends. And they're just some great people to be around. And Jesus obviously had a huge heart for the irreligious, the indifferent to truth, or those maybe even that were opposed to God's ways, but they're not bad people, if you will. Not like, they're no fun to be around. And sometimes I see church plants falling into I call it a pitfall, into the trap of like, we're only going to be reaching the irreligious people, those far from God. But let me tell you, someone who's very religious, are they not as well far from God if they don't come to God through Jesus? Absolutely. They're as lost, sometimes even more lost, as you see in the life of Christ when he was ministering on earth. Those people were harder to bring to the Son of God than the irreligious. But let me tell you, you're surrounded here in Colorado Springs with a lot of irreligious people. I'm not a rule follower in terms of like a religious rule. How is this church doing reaching the irreligious? Okay. So then there's a third group. Paul says here, when I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness. For I want to bring the weak to Christ. I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. So in other words, Paul's like, I'm trying to find common ground with all these weak, broken people. Does anybody know any weak, broken people in your life? Like we all do. We all do. And I think for me, when we were church planting, starting in 2006 up in Boulder, like I realized that the last time I was around kind of people that could care less about God was high school. And that had been about 10 years. And I think I forgot how to become friends or just be a friend to someone who doesn't care about Jesus like I do. I kind of forgot how to even relate to someone because I went to Bible college after school, after high school. Then I led a ministry, and then I was involved in church. And it had been 10 years, guys, since I knew how to be around someone that didn't love Jesus. It was really hard. And here we are trying to start a church. Are you kidding me? In one of the least reached churches in the country. It took us a while to learn how to love the irreligious, the non-religious, the non-churched people. But then he's talking about a different group of people here, the weak. And it's so easy for us in church, and I don't know if this has been your experience at all. I don't know anything about anybody's background here. But how many of you have been around a group of Christians that are like, they enjoy pointing out other Christians' weaknesses? Anybody been around people like that? Absolutely. Some people's whole Christian background, the reason why they're an anti-Christ person is because they grew up in a church where the church was just consumed with pointing out each other's weaknesses. That's not I don't want to be around a group of people like that. I'm a Christian. I want to run in the other direction. Right? We're just so consumed pointing out the weaknesses in one another. I mean, talk about a trap. And I know a lot of young church plants that are trapped in this. And they're almost prideful about the whole world's weakness, except for us. We're this great new church plant on the scene. That's not real attractive, by the way. If there's some of that going on, Scott, in the church, kick them out. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just saying that, sometimes as a new startup, we get pretty excited about what we're about, that we start thinking about all the other things in the world, all these weaknesses that other people have, and we better be careful to associate with them. Jesus hung out, just read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus hung out with a lot of broken, weak people, didn't he? And then he got accused by the Pharisees, by the religious people. You're hanging out with all of these weak, broken sinners. He called them the religious people called them scum. And Jesus is like, I came for those people, by the way. Yes, I came for you as the religious person, but I also came for you as a weak, broken person. And there's different kinds of brokenness. Scott, you've probably done a lot of counseling. Some of the others maybe have done some counseling with people. There's different kind of weaknesses. There's some people that are like, because of an upbringing, maybe they were abused somehow, like emotionally, physically, psychologically. They're just abused, and they have what I would call, because I've done a lot of Christian counseling, I would call sort of a broken, weak conscience, meaning because of some sort of abuse that they've experienced, and this might be you here today, that they've got this weakness, and so they can't be around a whole lot of stimuli that might be similar to what they experienced negatively, and so it might cause them to stumble, might cause them to sin, might cause them to think about oh yeah, that's what it was like when I had an abusive father or mother or grandparent or uncle or aunt or something like that. And so we do have to be careful in our context, right, in your small groups or in this church, that you might be doing some things that might they're not sinful things, but they might make some people feel uncomfortable based on some brokenness and baggage in their life. Well, Paul says here, he says, I try to find common ground with everyone. Now that's, Paul always uses this words like everyone and all people. I'm like, seriously, Paul? Well, that's Paul talking. As a church, we need to be careful. We're not necessarily able to reach everyone with every issue and every brokenness and every weakness. You'll wear yourselves out as a church, by the way. So it's not like, oh, okay, we got to take this really seriously, and we've got to find every common ground with every person in Colorado Springs, do everything we can to save them, right? Don't stress yourself out here as a young church, or us at Maranatha. How are we going to reach people? However, one of the groups of people that God's allowing Maranatha to reach are these wards of the state, foster kids. Now, Nebraska's not a huge population, right? We've got 1 million people total, I think, in our state. We were in California where 20 million people just lived in Southern California alone, right? But we work with this group called Royal Family Kids Camps. Have you ever heard of Royal Family Kids? It's a ministry for children that are wards of the state, and they want to get kids out for a week of camp. So in their lives, they could experience what Scott and Lindsay experienced. And these little kids, right, like 5 years old through 12 years old, and they come out, hundreds of them, and they have all these, like they have to have a 3-to-1 ratio. These kids are so weak because of what they've experienced. We have to have a 3-to-1 adult-kid ratio just to pull this camp off. That's crazy, guys. In our normal camps with healthier kids, not necessarily, it's a 1-to-7 ratio. But these royal family kids, they call them foster kids, they come out, have an unbelievable week of camp. This is probably for them the best experience to date they're maybe ever going to have in their upbringing, coming out to experience some of what you saw in that video of camp. But at the end of the day, we're wanting them to run into Jesus while they're there. And a lot of foster families are followers of Christ, knowing that at any moment these foster kids could leave or their parents get healthy enough to receive them back. So it's this incredible ministry. Now, we as Maranatha aren't trying to reach everyone, every weakness like Paul's talking about. But we have to think, like, what are you putting in our path, Lord, as a camp? Who? For us to get serious about ministering to. And that's one of the groups. And so one of my, just as I sit here before you, and I've done a lot of church plant counseling or coaching, and I bet you already have. But who are the 2 or 3? Think small initially, just groups of people with some, no doubt, some needs and some brokenness and some hurt, some abuse in their past. Maybe they feel disenfranchised. Who are some groups of people we could dial in and really make it a mission of Freedom Church to bring Christ to? Maybe you're already doing that right now to some groups of people. I celebrate that. Say, that's awesome. I commend you guys for that. And Paul is saying there's a lot of weak and broken people. And I try to find that common ground with those weak and broken people so that I might win more to Christ. But I go back to the religious for a second, or the irreligious, people that kind of look like they got it together. There's a lot of those in Colorado Springs, I'm sure, in your neighborhoods, etc. Don't necessarily, though, think we got to be just about reaching one type of group here. Because Paul says, don't forget about the religious. Don't forget about the irreligious. Don't forget about the weak and broken. And there you will have what I would just call like your church plant mission. To win more. Paul repeats the word win. W-I-N. Multiple times in this short little passage here. Win. I do all these things. I engage all these kind of different people groups. We all work together with our unique backgrounds and even our own issues, right? Our own baggage, our own backgrounds to win more people to Jesus. Because if you look, let's say you go 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and we just can't track any winning to Jesus. Something's broken. And I would say I've seen broken church plants. I was a part of even leading a church that we had some brokenness in our church because we just got so consumed for our own well-being that we weren't really being fruitful as a ministry. And we were a fairly new church plant. And I, as the pastor, had to check my own heart and spirit first. Am I pursuing the religious, the irreligious, the weak? Are we about this and not doing it perfectly and not everybody expected to do it the same way or at the same time? But if this recipe isn't happening here at Freedom Church, better just like close shop and join the Covenant Church here. I don't know. I'm not saying that you should. I'm just saying really think about what winning others to Jesus is looking like. And that does not mean like everybody's getting saved all the time. But I'm just saying, are we leading multiple kinds of groups and, backgrounds toward Jesus? And we're not in charge of saving them. Like Paul actually uses the word, so I might save some, but Paul, he wouldn't say he saves people, would he? It's Christ and the Holy Spirit transforming a life. But Paul does use the words so that I might save some. I might point them. I might lead them to Jesus. I might win. And I just think that's a pretty simple mission. for a new church like this that I get so excited about just sharing to this small group of people. I know there's others. This isn't just it. But I want you to think beyond just the 30, 40, however many people that are a part of Freedom Church. I want you to think about all the neighbors. Like, add up all those people that you know, the coworkers that you know, people at school. You start adding that number up, and you might have 300 or 400 people that this small little group touches. Some are religious. Some are irreligious. Totally indifferent to the things of God. Some are weak and hurting and wounded and broken. But I promise you, sometimes that's a great exercise to do, Scott, is we took our 30 or 40 people several years ago up in Boulder, and we just had a night where we literally went around the room, and someone got up here on a whiteboard, and we just wrote first names of everybody that we sort of knew in our spheres of influence that were religious, irreligious. We didn't use those same terms even. And by the time we were done, do you remember this, Natalie? By the time we were done, we had like 350 people. Now, we weren't a church of 350. We were a church of 30. But it just opened up our eyes that we stopped feeling sorry for ourselves that we were a small little startup. Because we saw 300, 400 people that we had the possibility of touching and winning to Jesus. And we had to constantly keep our sight on that like harvest of people, potentially. And that's hard when you're 10, 20 people in a room like this. And you're meeting at a weird time, 1:30, you know. I mean, yeah, you can get a little discouraged. Like, Lord, is this going to take, really? But God's in the business of growing his church. He's looking for faithful people to reach the religious, the irreligious, and the weak. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I hope that these words in Scripture, the words coming from my heart and mind, I pray that they were an encouragement. Because I know how hard it is, even like a loneliness, even like we're doing something wrong. Why isn't every chair in here full of people? But God, help them just to lift up their eyes, look at the harvest. There's hundreds of thousands of people that live around here. And this church is actually touching so much bigger of an audience, if you will. And that we each individually would think about who are the religious, who are the irreligious, who are the weak people. We only need to know one or two maybe. But to be intentional about winning them to Jesus and do it together as a church and celebrate when people come to you and they're won over to Christ. I pray that this church just is able to keep that mission. I pray that Maranatha could help them in their mission. In Jesus' name, amen.